Okay, should be recording. Welcome back to 1+1, guys. Your place for inconvenient truth-telling, myth-busting. We're with Malgorzata, Kulbaczewka of Transform Europe and the Barricade, and yes, we're talking about all sorts of things: Russia, Eastern European Democrats, and where the movement goes. Okay, so you're saying about Turkey. So hypothetically, if a Kurdish province of, say, Iran, Iraq, Syria was to ever have its own independence for Turkey, they just can't tolerate any Kurdish state. I mean, I would understand if that happened within their own country. I can sort of understand that logic, but I find that baffling that if Kurds who want self-determination in Iraq or Syria and elsewhere want their own nationhood, Turkey, Turkey says no. So can you respond to that?
Okay, the only Kurdish autonomy or another entity like this that Turkey tolerates is the Kurdish autonomy in Iraq. But there is a very simple reason. This is run by two families. This autonomy is run by the Barzani and Talabani clans that dominate all the local landscape, economy, politics, whatever. They are extremely corrupt, as you can imagine, and they even don't want, they also don't want any other Kurdish states to appear because that could endanger their little kingdom in Iraq. And perhaps Kurdish people would like to have a healthy democracy in the Kurdish state and not what they have now. So in fact, this Kurdish autonomy in Iraq is actually on good terms with Erdogan, and they are even coordinating attacks against Kurdish partisans if they happen to hide in this Iraq autonomous province. Yes, it is sick, but.
In fact, I had the great Rania Kalik on my program a couple of months ago, and she had done an article for Alternet, an investigative piece, in which she went to Iraq post ISIS, right-wing death squads coming out of the woodwork, and that Kurdish family and their Kurdish militias that you just mentioned, they fled the country, but in fact, they basically threw a community called the Yazidis under the bus, and actually, some of them actually even coordinated with ISIS to basically commit commit a genocide towards them. And we know that ISIS comes from the Gulf states, Turkey, and Israel, and so it's very interesting that you reveal that about Erdogan. Very selective in which Kurds he likes.
Yes, and the problem with Kurds is that even if they are present in Iran, Syria, and Iraq, still the most populous, the biggest Kurdish population still lives in Turkish borders. So should any independent Kurdistan appear in Syria or secede from Syria or Iraq, it is obvious that the Kurds in Turkey would like to join, especially after the decades of being denied of having their own nationality or being denied to speak Kurdish in public and so on. So this is kind of a similar situation as we had 19th century Poland partitioned between Prussia, then Germany, and Russia and Austria, and Prussia and Russia coordinating for sometimes their efforts against Poles, so that there is no Polish autonomy or no Polish state on neither side of the border. So as you can imagine, Finland and Sweden have actually quite a nice record of offering asylum to people that escaped from Turkey. Not only Kurdish activists, but also other activists.
Turkish dissidents.
Yes, Turkish dissidents.
Censors.
Yes, all kinds of these people. And as you remember, in the last couple of years, the level of repression, political repression in Turkey is on the rise. So basically, Turkey wanted to demonstrate that they don't agree to see different states supporting the Turkish dissidents. They wanted to show that they can stop someone else's political ambitions because they don't adhere to the general course of Turkish politics. Of course, what was achieved in the end is, well, I could say a quid pro quo, because what Sweden and Finland actually promised to do can be also not done in practice. Turkey, Sweden and Finland can always claim that they won't they will still keep offering asylum to people who are victims of the blatant human rights violations. And but for that moment, Erdogan got like their declaration of cooperation, which is important for his own propaganda that he sells to Turkish citizens.
Wow, unbelievable! And now, Malgorzata, how much time do we have before you have to go?
No, 15 minutes. 15 minutes, no more.
Oh, 15 minutes. Okay, then in that case, in that case, we're gonna do this. A lot of these questions I have are all very much linked. So I'm going to, so I'm going to save it for another. So I'm going to save it for another time. But then but then I'm going to ask you this, this question, this final question before you go. Which is, I wanted your thoughts on the very well-known Slovenian Marxist intellectual Slavo, his support for the NATO-led backed war against Russia, his stand with Ukraine despite the Nazi revisionism and Banderite cults in ascendancy across the region and the country, and what has been, and I'm just curious, what has been the response to Slavo's pro-imperialist nonsense? What has been the response of much of the Eastern European leftist circles and the intellectuals who are, anti-imperialist, anti-NATO, don't want problems with China, and would like détente with their fellow capitalist, socially regressive, baggage counterparts, that is, the current Russian state?
Okay, so first, I think a word of explanation on the Ukrainian neo-Nazis and so on.
Yes.
There is a lot of noise around that, and I would say that the problem is to great extent exaggerated. That saying that neo-Nazis have a kind of decisive role in the Ukrainian ruling circles is definitely not true. In fact, when the nationalist parties took part in the parliamentary elections, they had very little support. And basically, in the parliament of Ukraine, as of it is today, there is only one person who actually balloted from the Ukrainian nationalist, from a really nationalist party list, and who got elected. So,
but there has, but they have
the problem with
the problem
with extremists is that they are very outspoken. They are well organized. They can organize their supporters into the streets, and they can organize very loud street events, which give the impression that they are like 10 times more powerful than they actually are. Because I would say they had successes in street politics, but not in electoral politics. Due to this success in the streets, they go so far as to threaten other politicians for too moderate approaches, for example, to Russia. That was the case before the war. Or now they are able to threaten even Zelensky, that if he signs some peace treaty which does not guarantee Ukrainian victory, he might get killed. But the thing is that to say that the neo-Nazis are Ukrainians' favorite political option is definitely an exaggeration, and a huge exaggeration. Of course, there were some very unpleasant attempts at history revisionism from the side of Ukrainian National Memory, the Institute of National Remembrance that exists in Ukraine. And there were really some nasty attempts to portray ultra-nationalist partisans of Ukraine from the Second World period as a, standard national liberation force that did not organize ethnic cleansing or so. This is, of course, not true, and I guess we talked about Bandera and the ethnic cleansing of Poles in one of the episodes. But anyway, the fact that the Ukrainian insurgent army killed more than 100,000 ethnic Poles in today's Western Ukraine is a fact that was proved so many times that it is really a shame on Ukrainian Institute of National Remembrance that they still try to portray these events as a kind of civil war between Poles and Ukrainians, or if they try to say that all that was a Soviet provocation. No, it was not. It was a result of the extreme Ukrainian nationalism represented by the Ukrainian nationalist organization. But coming back to Ukraine of today, it is absolutely an exaggeration to say this is a Nazi country. It is absurd to say that Zelensky is a fascist guy himself, and it is really. And
he does sport this. He does sport the symbols and does think that Bandera controversial, but he can be people's heroes. But yeah,
this is basically the same that Polish right-wingers say about some of the bloodiest figures of the post-war anti-communist conspiracy, anti-communist underground. So, well, I think that picking up the worst nationalist figures as a collective memory heroes is a problem in many countries in Eastern Europe. This is, by the way, a question we could discuss one day too. But in any case, saying that Ukrainians are ethno-nationalists in their majority is definitely an exaggeration. And you asked me, what do Eastern European anti-NATO and anti-war thinkers now
what's been their response, as well as the very tiny Eastern European left intellectuals? What has been their response to Slavo Žižek's pro stand with Ukraine, let's fight Russia's stance?
Well, I think that I haven't heard personally of anybody answering directly to Slavoj Žižek apart from Ukrainian left-wing activists whose response is quite natural. Now I would say that if you are natural, I mean that if you are a citizen of Ukraine, and even if you are a left winger, a trade union activist or whatever, it is natural for a Ukrainian now to instinctively fight for their country, to defend their country. You can't expect from a Ukrainian in current conditions to say I am anti-NATO if they were invaded by Russia, and if basically the Western countries support their resistance. You can't really expect them to proclaim a kind of neutrality now or to say something else. They are defending their state. And if they hear from time to time Dmitry Medvedev or another figure saying again that there is nothing like Ukrainian nation, or that Ukraine must be cleansed of these ultra-right forces, well, this makes Ukrainians even more convinced that whatever they could think about the NATO, now it is the moment to fight against Russian invaders, and it happened that NATO is the ally. It is also very difficult. So that said, it is very difficult in Eastern Europe now to preach any form of neutrality or a third way between Russia, NATO, and whatever. Because if we can preach a kind of left-wing alternative, or we can demand that a peace movement appears, but these are not things that will happen from one day to another. The left, the left in Europe basically was not strong enough to build a serious alternative for now. This alternative is not on the place, and people are now facing choices. So perhaps it is up to us to start thinking about the alternatives. Perhaps it is too late already, but when I am, even for me, I am not a fan of NATO. I know how bloody this alliance is and how many wars it unleashed over the decades. But even listening to some of the comrades from the West now being focused on the NATO expansion to the East, I feel there is a big misunderstanding between us in the Eastern Europe and them in the West. I don't want to say about us and them because we agree on basically most of the anti-capitalist credo and we all want a better system. But really it is, I think that the explanations that link the invasion to Russia's political capitalism or Russians' willingness to keep the oligarchy intact are much more plausible than thinking about Russia's concern concerning the NATO enlargement. I think that the problem must be found in capitalism, in the transition, and in the way that Russian capitalism was developing, by the way, under the eyes of the Western enlightened capitalists who had no problems with that. So I think that here are the sources of the very problem.
And then just in closing, a quick response. So, do you think that sometimes we in the West too often, how can I say, that we too often overlook legitimate grievances that Eastern Europeans have towards Russia, given the fact that the Warsaw Pact, although there was a lot of good things about, the communist period, but because a lot of it was very much enforced on Eastern Europe by Russia, and because, you also can't forget Tsarist Russia's imperial ambitions, that we in the West sometimes tend to downplay legitimate grievances, hence why a lot of those people who we want to join our left movement fall prey to the ultra-nationalist and Banderite type of cults.
Yes, well, I think my answer could be somehow ambiguous because my position is in fact a little bit ambiguous as well. Well, I think that we in Eastern Europe can have legitimate grievances towards both Russia and the West. Yeah. We can have legitimate grievances towards Russia because it's basically, well, I could say this is my personal position. First of all, because it abandoned the project of liberating people, of building socialism, and the Russian elites agreed to build one of the worst possible versions of the market. And this, in fact, Russia is now, not long ago, Dmitry Medvedev posted in Telegram that Russia is now coming back to its historical mission of I remember how it sounded in Russian, but how to say it in English. Well, he basically stated that Russia's historical mission is to support the exploited and the oppressed, and that the invasion in Ukraine means that they are coming back to that mission. So, of course, the statement is absurd, but I would like to say that our great grievance of the East is that Russia actually abandoned this mission to be the hope of the colonial nations, to be the hope of us in Eastern Europe always being a kind of cheap force reservoir. The Soviet Union, with all problems it had and with all the bad things that happened over the 7 decades of its existence, it was a rallying point for liberation movements. And when Russia abandoned that mission, it really made a horrible thing that opened up for Western hegemony, for the American hegemony, and basically untied the hands of the NATO to start more wars in the Middle East and elsewhere. So this is my personal grievance towards Russia. And the second, and why we in the Eastern Europe, we can be simultaneously angry with the West, because it also because the West promised us that if we if we come to the free market logic, if we employ the free market logic in its most neoliberal form, we will gradually become the part of the West, which was never to come. We were always to be like, well, not even the younger sister, like the Medvedev talks about Ukraine. We were to be the place where there are cheap workers and so on. So in fact, we were never allowed to develop it's our own way, and our genuine achievements under the socialist times were turned into something we are supposed to be ashamed of. So I think it could be good if the leftists of the West and of the East could sit down and talk and share the heritages of both sides. And if we together came up at some common platform, I think it could be great.
I completely agree with you, and that is a very, very good place to. That's a very good place to end. And but I noticed you sort of avoided commenting on Zizek, and I'm just going to say the guy's a douchebag. But I'll just and I'll just leave it at that. All right. Well, we were joined on this edition of 1+1 with one of my favorite returning champions, the Polish independent journalist Malgorzata, Kulbaczewka, Figat, correspondent and frequent contributor to Cross-Border Talks, Transform Europe, and a frequent contributor and guest on the Barricade. Check out both places, folks, and donate generously to them. And Malgorzata, I look forward to having you back in the future because we didn't get to some of the questions I wanted to get to. And I also, hopefully, there'll be a planned trip to see you and the Barricade team in Poland, Romania, and hopefully Bulgaria sometime, hopefully in the future. And again, I hope that folks do donate to both Transform Europe, Cross-Border Talks, and the Barricade, which is a pan-Eastern European indie-left news outlet that offers a critical leftist perspective on Eastern European and international affairs. So we're going to end it right there. Malgorzata, thank you so much, and hope to have you hope to see you very soon.
Yeah, thank you.